Have you ever walked into a significant public place and noticed the public art? And really noticed it, looked at it, absorbed it, spent time with it, contemplated it, wondered about it, allowed it to work on your mind, on your perceptions, on your soul, on your feelings, allow it to do whatever it was intended to do by the artist and by the people who paid for it and put it up in this significant public place, whether it's a park, a plaza, a train station. There's public art everywhere, particularly in major cities. And oftentimes we hope that it's beautiful and inspiring and uplifting, that it serves a purpose for community, cohesion, and general upliftment of the spirit. Sometimes it just kind of recedes into the background, especially if we've seen it a lot, and we become a little blind to it. But it is always political. Obviously, public art is expensive, and it requires state authorization to be put in place. So someone with wealth and influence and authority is involved in creating and displaying this public art, and for how long it's going to be there. So even though many artists like to be apolitical, they don't like identity politics and things like that, they try to have their art interpreted in other ways, this is in fact impossible. It will and must be interpreted in political, particularly identitarian and cultural ways. It's unavoidable. It's public art. It demarcates a territory. It shows who owns that territory, who has political and cultural ascendancy in that territory. It's unambiguous. Now, hopefully, even though it's impossible to divide public art from politics, it can also be artful and inspiring and spiritually uplifting, like we were saying. So it has to be a combination. That's what makes good art. So today we're going to talk about the psychological effects of public art, the political effects of public art, and the spiritual effects of it, and why it exists, and some interesting modern developments about public art. Most of the photos, in fact, almost all of them, except for the last few slides, are my own photos that I took in my travels to Russia. And I use my own photos because I don't want to scour the internet for a bunch of random photos, and because Russia's statues are mostly all newly built. Over the last 200 years, particularly over the last 30 to 40 years, they have all of the different types of statues that we're going to discuss in the, all still nice, new, extant, visible. If you want to look at older types of statuary from Western Europe, you find them in ruins or in museums, and they're not exactly public art anymore. So I didn't really use those examples. Also, I've never extensively traveled around Western Europe, so I don't have my own photos, and I just wanted to mostly use my own intellectual property for this. But anyway, we'll just jump right in here. This big photo here is in St. Petersburg, and this photo on the left is in Moscow. They are both of Peter the First. This one is a little more artistic. He was said to have a pretty small head. And he was, a great czar. He is remembered both as a great man and as a bad man. But he was very historically significant. And although many Russians consider him to be a bit of a Westernizer, a Europeanizer, and they resent him for that, they also love him for his greatness, for his unifying of the Russian Empire, and helping give Russia a cultural direction. This statue on the left was, I think, built in the late 90s. It's pretty new, if I remember correctly. And the one on the right, same thing. I think it was put up in the late 90s. And you'll notice something interesting about Russian statues, especially the bronze ones. You can see his fingers are very, very shiny. And you can see this young woman here is touching his hand. She's probably making a prayer or a wish of some kind. And many statues are rubbed by Russian people for good luck, for wish granting, and things like that. And so you'll see almost every bronze statue has shiny parts that have been rubbed off by passers-by. I want to do a photo project where I just go around the entire country looking for rubbed bronze statues because they're everywhere. Of course, we have another statue of Peter I. This is on the so-called Thunderstone in the center of St. Petersburg. Some researchers believe this is actually a statue of Alexander the Great. I don't know. Might be true. I have no idea. There's that missing time theory. We're not going to talk about that here. But it is, of course, the most massive, or one of the most massive stones ever moved by man in recorded history. And it cuts quite an imposing figure when you're walking around this park here. I used a really wide-angle lens, so it looks small. I wanted to show the park and everything like that, to show that it's very central, it's very noticeable. People see it constantly. When you're walking up behind it, you can see it from about 1 mile away. And in front of it, there's a river that goes along here, and passing ships will see it very clearly. And of course, it was built by, I think, Catherine II, this monument, dedicated to Peter the Great, Peter I. And it's obviously a very notable individual, as a ruler. And this was the first stage of statue building in history. And basically, you see the phases of statuary and public art. The very first phase is kings, gods, mythological creatures, appointed rulers, and stuff like that. Here we have a statue of Catherine II, or Catherine the Great. This was built in 1873 by Alexander II. Well, he didn't build it himself. He had it commissioned. And these are her court, notable diplomats and advisors. So, rulers. Here we have Poseidon. This is by the harbor, or what used to be a harbor. I think it's just like a park now. But it's dedicated to naval commerce and travel, because St. Petersburg is at the delta of the Neva River, which is known as the Nile of the North. St. Petersburg is sometimes referred to as the Cairo of the North, sometimes the Venice of the North. Very important maritime city on planet Earth. And so we have a statue of Poseidon/Neptune to guide the sailors home, to give them good luck and blessing on their journeys as they either enter into the eastern continent or leave the eastern continent through the delta of this river. We also have the horse tamers. This is on a bridge in St. Petersburg. There are 4 of these guys taming horses on the 4 corners of the bridge here. And cars just drive over it. It's a very busy road, and it goes through the stages of taming a horse, from the earliest breaking the wild horse to calming it down. Here we have the guy wrestling it in the first stage. I think this is the second stage, and so on. And this is meant to exhibit not only control over wild nature and mankind's ascendancy in this world, but in spiritual philosophy, the horse represents the senses, the 5 senses. And of course, the senses create desires, worldly desires, and we have to control and modulate our senses so that we can control and modulate our desires. It's part of self-observation and self-control training for spiritual transcendence. And so this being like in a very central part of St. Petersburg, where people, probably millions of people every day see these statues. And it's a constant reminder of having self-control, control over your lower nature for spiritual ascendance. Here's a similar idea in the underground, the metro of Moscow. This just says «Mir vo всем» over and over again. It means peace within everyone. And so this is a mural of inner peace. It's to cultivate peace within yourself. If there can't be peace in the world, you should at least be able to cultivate peace within yourself. And it's a constant reminder. This is in the center of Moscow. It's a very, very busy metro station. People see this, again, millions of people see this every single day. Outside of Krasny Plashad, Red Square, we have this cute little almost underground part of the square where we have fairy tales, the depictions of old Slavic classic fairy tales. So again, we have cultural mythology coming in to remind people of their roots, of their ancestry. Each one of these statues here represents a different fairy tale. Here we have the old man who found the wish-granting goldfish, and the moral of that skazka, the fairy tale, is that you shouldn't wish for things, you shouldn't wish for results, you should wish for the courage, the skill, the knowledge, and the wisdom, and the determination and endurance to meet your own goals, to do things yourself, to get what you want yourself. Wish and pray for good characteristics instead of wishing and praying for results, which of course is a very anti-New Age concept. New Age people are obsessed with manifestation and just getting results without working on themselves and stuff like that. This is a very traditional statue that reminds people of traditional values of inner development and self-development and determination and bravery and perseverance. Ignore the gorgeous women. Of course, those are works of art created by God, but we are here talking about works of art created by man. We have the griffins on a bridge in St. Petersburg, these famous griffins that are bronze cast. In World War II, the wings were destroyed through gunfire, hand grenades, and terrible things like that. And after the war, they were rebuilt and gilded in gold as a symbol of transcendence. When we see animals with wings, it's an ancient symbol for transcending lower nature, similar to the horse tamers, where you acknowledge your instincts, but you sublimate them to be more spiritualized. So you still use your instincts, but you use them for good, for human ascendance. And of course, griffins represent protection of a place, in this case, protection of St. Petersburg. And of course, people believe because these withstood the siege of World War II, mostly, of course, their wings were destroyed, but the lion bodies themselves remained intact, that it was, a sign of blessing and good luck and whatnot. And so they gilded them to remind people of those spiritual values of bravery, leadership that lions represent, fortitude, and protection. And then when we pass from the kings and gods and mythological figures, civilization moved into, Western civilization anyway, moved into a phase of sort of Christian statuary and public art. And so, of course, here we have on the side of a cathedral in St. Petersburg, a beautiful, what are they called? Not a fresco, but I can't remember the term for this type of half painting, half statue installation. And in Moscow here, just outside of Red Square again, we have a patriarch of the Orthodox Church. In Western countries, you'll see statues like this of saints, of Catholic saints, who are essentially just pseudo-historical versions of European deities. Like Saint Bridget is, of course, Brigitte, the goddess of fertility to the Nords and Celts. That sort of thing. So you'll see a lot of those in Western Europe. In Russia, you don't really see any of the Catholic saints. You see actual historical patriarchs that just represent their own saints, their own philosophers and sages who advanced the Orthodox tradition. Because, of course, Orthodoxy is not so much about biblical accuracy or biblical interpretation. It's about extremely wise, spiritually powerful, well-disciplined men who push the mystical tradition forward. And so the patriarchs, according to the Slavic people, create a living tradition. There are living patriarchs today that have their own mystical and spiritual experiences, their own philosophy of life, their own interpretation of modern cultural and political events and things like that. And they are constantly creating a living tradition, which is a lot different from the more dead Western Christian tradition, which falls back on old saints who we don't even know were real or not, the old book, who, it's just stagnant interpretation and it's just dusting off skeletal old forms. So there, in the Slavic countries, you'll see newer statues being built. I think, again, this one was built in the 90s. A lot of this stuff is really new. This cathedral, of course, is being renovated right now. You can see all this scaffolding around it. This is the, in English, the Cathedral of the Spilt Blood, I believe it's called. And it's where Alexander II was assassinated. It's the spot on the street where that bomber ignited a bomb under his carriage. And they built a cathedral there, and they built a new tower there recently, and they're renovating it and everything. Which, again, this is why I chose Russia to show this stuff, because they're not decaying the way the West is. Here, again, actually, this is a different type of monument. You also have monuments to victorious battles and the conquering or founding of cities. This I took when I was in Vyborg, which is northwest of St. Petersburg, about an hour and a half by train. A long time ago, centuries ago, it was part of Finland until 1790, when it was conquered by Russia. A big chunk of Finland was conquered by Russia. And this is a monument to that. Again, I think this was built in the 1990s. And it's a monument to their victories. Here is Field Marshal Mikhail Bogdanovich. He was one of the war leaders who was in this battle of Vyborg. He was also in the Napoleonic Wars, as you can see here, 1812 to 1815. Actually, he was involved since the 1790s to the 1820s, if I remember correctly. So now we get into the level of notable individuals, which is the third stage. So the first stage, kings and gods and mythological stuff. The second stage is Christian motifs. The third stage is notable figures, generals, nobility, martyrs, patrons, dignitaries, artists, writers, people like that, like real specific individuals. This is in St. Petersburg at Kazan Cathedral. A beautiful Italian style, Romish style cathedral. A lot of theories that it's older than what the official histories say. If we want to take a tangent real quick, I tend to agree with those researchers who think St. Petersburg is far older than the official histories. Being there, and I have a little bit of background in archaeology from when I was young and younger than I am now, and it does stick out intuitively to me that these streets, these buildings, they are far, far older than we're told. Here in Moscow is this Marshal Zhukov, I believe? Yes. He was a war hero in both World War I and World War II. This statue was built in, again, I think it was 1995, maybe 93. Again, you can see this is near Red Square. I think this is like the Diplomacy Museum or the Wartime Museum. I forget what exactly it's called. Some big national museum. And it demarcates, it's unmistakable. Of course, this is in the middle of Moscow, so it's Russian territory, but it has to be filled with statues like this. It's a demarcation of whose culture this is, which government rules this land. It's unmistakable. Oh, here we have Morristown, New Jersey. Back in the Western Hemisphere, we of course have George Washington, Alexander Hamilton, and the Marquis de Lafayette. Here we have one of those sort of unknown soldier type statues. So notable individuals, but also a little bit of the noble fallen, which we'll get into later, the next stage. But this is, I think, a Civil War Northern Union guy. I think it's just an anonymous statue. But this is meant to remind people who live in New Jersey their history. A large portion, I think the majority of the armed forces in the United States come from New Jersey. Most military bases, we have the highest density of military bases in New Jersey, things like that. And so, of course, this is here to remind us of that history and to make sure we appreciate it and we don't lose sight of where we've been, where we're going, things like that. Back to Russia. Here we have Tsiolkovsky. Основоположник космонавтики. This is the founder of cosmonautics. And in front of a really big memorial that we'll get to, which was probably my favorite memorial, at least in terms of inspiring beauty. And then on the right in St. Petersburg, outside of a art museum, we have, of course, Alexander Pushkin, the great writer. When I found this statue, I called him Alexander Pupushkin because unfortunately he is constantly covered in pigeon shit. Another writer, not too far away from that statue, by a theater school, we have Alexander Griboyev. He's just another great writer. Again, pigeons love hanging out on this statue too. And Dostoevsky. This is on Ulica Dostoevskого, or Dostoevsky Street in St. Petersburg. This is a new statue. It's in a more postmodern style. It's made to look like it's carved out of stone, but it's cast in bronze. And again, just a great writer. And it's to remind people that, you know, a lot of the great literature that we read in the West is really Russian literature. A lot of, you know, you look at like a list of the top 50 great authors and musical composers of the last 200 years, and like half of them are Russian. Back in Moscow, now we kind of get into the stage of the noble fallen, the honorable fallen, which is the next stage that you see on the timeline of history in the general trend of Western society. After the stage of notable heroes, notable individuals, we get to more anonymous individuals, anonymous collectives of individuals who served in war. This is a monument to all of the battlefields of World War II. If you zoom in, I can't zoom in on this slideshow, unfortunately, but you see the names of regions all around this monument of places where the Red Army fought. And here we have Archangel Michael slaying the dragon down here. This is a shot from behind, and there is an eternal flame here. There are many eternal flames around Russia and Europe that represent the people who passed during wars. And they're meant to instill a somber mood. I mean, it's pretty obvious. A reflective mood, a mood of gratitude, a mood of faith, a mood of remembrance and memorial for people who give their lives for their own people, for their culture, for the future of their societies. And it should inspire you to service and self-sacrifice in your time. This was an interesting monument that I found. By the way, all of this is at Park Pobiedy, or Victory Park. This is also at Victory Park. Here we have a plaque that represents the alliance between the United States and Russia during the 1945 Elba campaign, which began on April 25th. Oops. And it was funny. I actually took this photo on April 25th, 2024. And a funny sort of coincidence. And here down the road from this plaque, we have the coalition in World War II. We have the French, the Russians, the Americans, and the British, you know, doing what they did in World War II. And this was installed in 1995. I think this was also erected in 1995. I saw a lot of American-Russian joint memorials that have been built between the 90s and today. New ones are still being built that honor American servicemen. Imagine the American government funding public artworks that honor Russian servicemen. You couldn't dream of it. We have such a backwards view of Russia, such an incorrect view of Russia in the Western world. While Russia is honoring us and trying to create friendship and alliance with us, we are just spitting it back in their faces. It's disgusting, in my opinion, and shameful. And it's sad, honestly. It like makes me ashamed to be an American sometimes, the way we treat our cousins and brothers overseas. But these monuments are there to sort of show that cooperation prevents war. If we just had understanding and acceptance of our differences, then a lot of horrors could be and could have been avoided. Here we have another anonymous fallen warrior with his mother. That's supposed to be. This is inside of Park Pobedi Museum. It's a beautiful display, I think, and it's just to demonstrate the sadness of often needless sacrifices. And this statue stands roughly, I think, 9 feet, so like a person would be about here in height. And it's a very, very quiet space. The sound is very dampened in here. They have a lot of like sound absorbing stuff behind the walls, and it's a very interesting, quiet environment that it's just you and the statue when you're there. It's interesting. And this white marble is it's marble, I believe. It's just so pure and blindingly white. When you get up close, it's kind of almost ethereal looking. Back in St. Petersburg, this is another war memorial. Я знаю имен всех героев борьбы за свободу, кто кровь свою отдал род человеческий щит, безменных всем им запомнят и честь этот камень на долгие годы поставлен. So basically what that means is it's not known. The names of all of the heroes who gave their blood for freedom, they'll be remembered and memorialized and honored with this stone, which will stand for many long years. This is right next to this eternal flame here, another eternal flame, and this is a very popular park in St. Petersburg. It's is this the Fields of Mars, or it's near the Fields of Mars? And people cross through it all day, every day. It's a very heavily trafficked area, and it's quite large, quite spacious. And it's, again, memorials to the honored fallen. Then we get into regional celebration, which is the next stage of... Well, actually, regional celebration kind of bleeds through all the stages of statuary. You find regional celebration in the oldest statues and the newest statues. Each one of these figures here in Moscow, this is at an exposition park called VDNH, or VDNH. They each represent a major region of the Soviet Union. This was built, I want to say, in the 1950s or 60s. And each one of these is a spirit of the biome. These represents the different biomes of the Soviet Union. So, you know, the tundra, the taiga, the temperate forests, the boreal forests, the lakelands, and all the different biomes. And you see that each spirit is holding a plant common in that biome, and behind them are trees that commonly grow in whichever biome. And I think some of them have little animals near them too. So regional celebration is meant to sort of expand your mind geographically when you see it. It helps you imagine the expanse of the territory that your culture is in charge of, that your culture is the steward of. The plant life is supposed to remind you to be good stewards of nature. Of course, there are lots of reforesting efforts throughout Russian history. Russians love planting trees. You know, they have their own sort of fairy tales of Johnny Appleseed like we have in the West here. In the East, they have many historical, centuries-old forestation projects that go on, which is very interesting. Some people, you know, there's like, it's kind of like a mythological folkish joke that all of the trees in Russia were planted. And so this helps you to imagine in your head the expanses of territories and the diversity of nature that exists within your cultural domain. And it really is kind of, you feel the expansiveness. It comes sort of from the heart center when you see these sort of natural biome-based symbols. Your heart expands along with your mind and your imagination across the surface of the earth, and you get a real sense of the breadth of where you can live and what you can do with the nature that is at your disposal and for your enjoyment. And it's really the foundation of life here. Back in Moscow, in the Park Pobedy Museum, we have the Hall of Heroes, which shows every major city that was successfully defended by the Red Army during the Second World War. So this is like a combination of the honorable fallen and spirits of place. So this guy here represents the spirit of the Slavic military, but also sort of like civic spirits, like the god of population centers. These were sort of, imagine a house spirit according to the pagan tradition, but extend that to a city, kind of like in the ancient Roman and Greek tradition. There were these gods of polities, gods of city-states, and this is sort of a modern version of that. There's also a gigantic sword at his feet. This sword is like 7 feet long. It's wild. And it was laid at his feet because it's a sword for a deity. That's why it's so big. It's symbolically made and forged for a deity that protects the cities of the region. Then after the honorable fallen, we get into the next stage of statuary and public art, where they start to honor working people, the people who do the difficult jobs that are required for society to function. The farmers who grow the food, the infrastructuralists who make sure that the energy flows and the water's clean, and the builders who build and repair your homes and buildings, and the artisans who make all of our useful items that we use every day. Here this is in Moscow, that same train station with the peace, with the inner peace mural. It says Druzhba Ruskih и Ukrainskih Kolkhoznikov, which means friendship between Russian and Ukrainian collectivized farmers. Of course, these metro stations were built during the Stalin era. You might think this is ironic or something. Of course, it is a form of propaganda. As I was saying earlier, all public art is political, whether we want it to be or not. And this here is just showing this sort of managerial and engineering class from Russia and the agricultural class from Ukraine working together. Whether you think that's ironic or not, that's up to your interpretation. But it's there, and it's made to instill a sense of pride in work and in alliances and working for like the greater good sort of idea. Same thing here. This is at Vyborg again, that same exposition ground, and we have these gigantic agriculturalists, a male and a female, on this incredible monument to industrial and agricultural work. All of these frescoes are different agriculturalists and machine workers, industrialists. And it's an enormous, like, Arc de Triomphe type structure, and it's made to help you feel the importance and weight of that type of work on civil infrastructure that is so necessary, and it looms large even though it's considered lower class or middle class work. It's extraordinarily important. Here we go back to that place in Moscow, the cosmonaut, the founder of cosmonautics. This is what the top of the monument looks like. It's a big rocket ship. This thing is incredibly tall, very beautiful. It's made to inspire. It's dedicated to the people who worked on the Soviet space program, who are represented here at the base of the memorial. On this side, we have the sort of industrialists and the like hard laborers who are represented here, and their support for the space program, all that they did, and of course the children that grow up to become astronauts. And on the other side, we have the more technical and intellectual side of things that went to work for the space program. We have Sputnik here, and we have that. I like to think of this as the baby on the left who grew up to become the astronaut or something. I don't know. And I'm very proud of these photos. I captured a couple of good moments, I think. Here we have like a kid in a stroller walking in the same direction as these people. Here's the kid in the statue. And then here we have going in one direction, supporting for this, collective effort, the space program. That was this whole cultural effort. And then we have these modern, post-Soviet people. They're dressed up like business casual, financial class, corporate class people. They seem to be involved in finance capitalism and stuff like that. And they are walking in the opposite direction. Of course, finance capital is utterly divorced from the industrial base, utterly divorced from the intellectual base, and it is about individualism as opposed to collective effort. And they're walking in the opposite direction. I just thought that was an interesting photographic story to tell. I just made that up in my head, but that's photography for you. And then this one, she's walking in the same direction with her kid. So you just have these two juxtaposed ideas, which represents Russia these days. You have the Russia that has Western values, which is collapsing and decaying along with the West. And then you have the Russia who still has their Russian values, which, in my opinion, are going to take them into the future. More workers. Here we have a photographer, pamiętnik fotografu. This means a memorial or a monument to a photographer. I wanted to keep this guy in because we have this modern camera phone, and then we have this old-timey camera. But again, you have the bronze being rubbed here for good luck. His nose is real shiny. The dog's tongue and his ears. People come by and pet the dog. But Russians respect the art of photography. There are many, many great Russian photographers, famous Russian photographers. They are considered great artists in their own right. We respect them in the West, too. But yeah, this is just a dedication to the occupation of photography. Here we have a riverboat pilot. Being at the mouth of the Neva, St. Petersburg has many ship's captains and riverboat pilots. It's a very, very important part of the economy and the lifestyle here, whether you're just taking a small boat to travel or there's a large ship coming in with international trade goods going down the same river. And again, lots of rubbed off spots on this statue. His mustache is nice and clean. But it's to pay respect to one of the more fundamental jobs in St. Petersburg. It's more or less unique because there are so many opportunities to pilot a boat around St. Petersburg as opposed to other cities around the world that don't have as many waterways. It's sort of, again, like Venice, like Cairo, Egypt, other places like Hong Kong, and other like river delta type cities, more or less unique to those types of cities and to honor the people who choose such a life. Here we have hunters. These bronze statues with their hunting dog. This is another Moscow metro station. Again, this is probably the most popular, the most rubbed statue in all of Russia is this dog right here. Almost everybody who passes by it will rub the dog's nose. Almost every single person. You can just see lines. It probably gets 10 million rubs a day. Not even exaggerating. That's probably the estimated number. And then we come into the last stage that's represented in Russia, because Russia doesn't have any of the really postmodern stuff that we'll get into next. But this is approaching postmodern. We get into basically corporate decoration, right? So after revering and honoring sort of anonymous workers and laborers that we want to respect and inspire, the next stage is just sort of decorating commercial shopping centers with sort of nebulous, pretty objects. Now, I'm neither for nor against this type of artwork. Some people absolutely hate it because they think it's soulless and lifeless, and yeah, I agree with all of their criticisms. But it's also better than not having it in these shopping centers. This could just be blank sidewalk, and it would just be a shopping center where you get your, coffee and your new Nikes, and then you go home. At least there's something there. Of course, I would prefer it to be something a little more transcendent and inspiring, because this is sort of just dime a dozen nebulous stuff. It doesn't inspire, it doesn't uplift, it doesn't really do much other than provide some aesthetic decoration. And so this is when art becomes merely decorative. There's really no deeper meaning to it. It's just they wanted something pretty to not leave people feeling empty or whatever while they're at their capitalist consumption shopping center, because psychologically they know, like, consumption is a hollow spiritual hollowing out experience, and the corporate managerial class knows that they have to give something decorative and beautiful to sort of offset the soullessness of buying stuff, of spending money. And so they hire something that's utterly inoffensive. They try to make it as not political as possible, as acultural as possible, as meaningless as possible, while still maintaining some type of aesthetic pleasantness. Because the corporations, of course, they don't want to offend anybody. They are internationalist. They are multicultural. They don't want to have like a statue of a Russian hero, like a writer or a military officer or anything like that, because that is, choosing a culture to uphold and uplift. When these are the companies in here could be like, Adidas and Nikes and Starbucks and these international banks and international companies and conglomerates that would probably be offended by a Russian war hero being put up in front of their, store or whatever. You know how internationalists want to be multicultural and cosmopolitan. So they provide this type of artwork. They install this type of what they think is politically neutral stuff. But in being non-political and choosing to be nebulous, amorphous, and so on, they are in fact being political, because they are denying the cultural sovereignty of this territory, in a sense. They are rejecting it because they're afraid of it. They acknowledge it and have chosen not to support it because they support a globalized world, not a sovereign national world of different multipolar powers. They believe in unipolar, liberal, Western, capitalistic economic values, and they don't want anything to get in the way of that. So this is, in fact, a political statement. It is the first degeneration, I would say, of public art, is sort of nebulous corporate art in the commercial sector. And I only have this one photo. I'm not that interested in taking photos of this stuff. I was more interested in photographing the people who are interacting with it. That's what interested me more than the work itself. So I don't generally have a lot of corporate artwork photography. But there are, how many millions of examples can you find of this in the Western world, particularly in Western Europe and the United States? There's just so much of this stuff. And I'm not going to lie, it is aesthetically pleasing, a lot of it. It is kind of beautiful. But that's all it is. It's nice to look at. That's about it. It doesn't make me think of anything. It doesn't uplift my soul. It doesn't inspire me to action. It doesn't inspire me to contemplation. It doesn't inspire anything. It's just aesthetics. And then here, when we are degenerating even past the point of caring about aesthetics, we get stuff like this. This was made by a statue maker named Thomas Price. I think he's English. I'm not entirely sure. But he has a whole series of these statues. This is in Times Square, New York City. So now I didn't take this photo. We're now looking at photos that I found online. The last few slides are not my photos. But this is in Times Square. Here we have, who is this? Is this, I can't remember his name. A composer, something Cohen, George Cohen maybe, a great composer from the 19th, early 20th century. And this is just, it's a token. It's the Guardian calls it the Black Every Woman, and he has male ones that the Guardian calls the Black Every Man. And they do nothing. They stand there. They're totally uninspiring. They have no role, no occupation. They have no distinction of any kind. They're not inspiring. This one, of course, is obese. It's not even a healthy person. It's a generic token. We don't see any exceptional qualities whatsoever. This is in Florence, Italy. And here we have Michelangelo's statues. We have his David here, and then right next to it we have this woman staring at a cell phone. And it's gilded. Like, why is this one golden? Is it like to try and one up the David or something? Like, it's really awkward. This is the only golden one. The rest of them are black. So it's like, why'd they gild this one? As a way of upstaging Michelangelo's David. And she's just staring at her phone, looking bored, and she has no role in life. She has no purpose. She has no exceptional qualities. And it's like supposed to be like, what? Are you supposed to feel like you should be rewarded for merely existing? Is that what this public art is saying? Is you don't have to do anything. You don't have to do anything special or be disciplined or achieve anything. You shouldn't be rewarded for achievement. No, you should be rewarded just for existing and being who you are. And we're supposed to accept these statues just because of who they are and who they represent. Here, this is off of Price's website. His critical investigation of these concepts. Now, these concepts that he's talking about, this is the traditional way of making a statue, whether casting something in bronze after you create the mold yourself, you carve a mold as an artist and then cast bronze, or you carve it out of marble, the whole statue out of a block of marble or stone, or you shape it with clay. There are traditional skillful means of creating a statue. Well, anyway, that's what the concepts are, is traditional means of creating an artistic work. So Price's critical investigation of these concepts extend beyond the medium of sculpture, utilizing material techniques and modes of display that question social and artistic conventions. Now, he's questioning social and artistic conventions. He's questioning these techniques that traditional artists use for a very important reason, because these are 3D scans of people that were turned into an XML file and then 3D printed or molded using a computer. He didn't really make these. He just scanned a bunch of people, turned them into composites. So he scanned a bunch of African American women or African English, black women, made a sort of Black Every Woman with like a composite of like, a dozen or so faces on his computer. So I guess there's some artistry there. It's a form of collage. I'll give him that. But that's where his artistry ended, was just with digital collage work. The rest is just using a computer program to make a CAD key model, a 3D model, and then you can mass produce them, as is seen here. Because here, this is the one in Times Square, but this is a different one. This is just another manufactured version of the same thing. Here we have the one in Florence, except it's not gold here. So these can be mass produced in this, it's silicon bronze, I believe, is the material, which is a 3D printer material, which is why I theorize that they're 3D printed. I don't actually know that for a fact, but they're clearly mass producible in a short time frame, whatever technique he's using. And they can just be bought wholesale, bought in bulk, made to order, bought off the shelf. And there are many copies of these around the world. And it's like, just there for corporate developers making a new shopping center or a new art gallery or something, or, just put these in a train station, just buy one, prove that you're not racist, buy one today, put it in your train station, use your constituents' money, because of course, most of these are in Europe. Here we have one in, where is this? I think this is in Rotterdam in England at the central train station. And look at this thing. It's like 13 feet tall. And it's just there. And it's like challenging people to criticize it or to complain about it so that they can be called racist. these are provocations put there by the elite managerial class. You know what I mean? Like, a lot of this stuff is put there by these NGOs, which are generally made up of people who are in that revolving door between the government and these NGOs, or they're put there by the government themselves. So you have this revolving door between like artistic philanthropic quote unquote NGOs who like to manage art galleries and do public art installations, who are also state employees. They moonlight as state government employees. And the thing about these statues is that these are large, simplistic, and unsophisticated, and easily recognizable and seen from a distance. What other type of public artwork is large, unsophisticated, simple, and easily recognizable from a distance? A flag. Whether it's the flag of a clan, the flag of a government or a state, the flag of a kingdom, the flag of a tribe, or the flag of some government like that, they are there to demarcate a territory that is under that person's control. That's what a flag is for. They are tokens. They are not artful. They are simply political demarcations for conquered territory, for owned territory. So basically, these are flags that are telling people throughout Europe, England, and the United States who has conquered these territories, because you have to have a lot of money and state backing to make these public art installations, to put these in public spaces. You have to have the authority and the funding and support from the government to do so. So it's unambiguous. It's an unambiguous political symbol signifying the conquering of these territories. And of course, these are, you can't criticize these objects. Everyone is so scared to say anything about these tasteless, artless things because they're afraid of being called racists, bigots, and what have you. And it's like they're purposely put there by the managerial elite, aka the deep state, the people who we didn't elect but somehow have all this cultural power to make these cultural decisions, and put this shit in our faces, and they're provoking us to say something so that we know who you are and we can call you a bigot. We can know who are the opponents of the elite. Well, that would be me. I am one of your opponents. I'm not afraid of saying it. I'm not afraid of criticizing this artless, soulless, uninspiring, unhealthy garbage that is being put in our streets and in our significant places without our consent, as a clear provocation and standoffish affront to our culture. I mean, even this guy, look at his face. He probably hates it. Like, is he thinking, oh, because that guy's a black guy, I'm supposed to be inspired by this? He's like, the dude's just sitting on his cell phone. I think this statue is called Reaching Out. This is in London. Like, I don't think this guy's inspired. It's like, oh, it's a guy who looks like me. No, I don't think he cares. But we're supposed to love and revere these statues just because of who they are. Not what they achieve, not their skills, not their talents, not their role in life, just because of who they are. And that to me is nonsense. It's not inspiring. It's not inspiring at all. It's not uplifting. It doesn't motivate. It is, in fact, demoralizing. It is whatever the opposite of motivating is, demotivating. It is, these are flags dedicated to the liberal world order. These are just in-your-face commentaries on egalitarianism, non-exceptionalism, equality, multiculturalism, materialism, with their cell phones, radical individualism, democracy, all those liberal values that are just being upheld by these token flags, these token cosmopolitan demarcations of our significant places being conquered. So I think it's my opinion that such statues should be removed. They should be given back to the artist who made them, first and foremost. If he doesn't want them, they should be sold to private collectors. Now, I have no problem with people collecting private art, no matter what type of art it is. I don't care how tacky and stupid it is. Everybody has their preferences, and these things can be held in private collections. No problemo. or they can be put into less significant places or educational institutions as object lessons in what I've been talking about this whole time, the stages of public art, from the first stage of kings and gods to this final stage, and the whole process that we walked through this video. These can be object lessons in the politics of art. And you know how and what generic tokens do to the minds of people, generic political tokens. Because I'm against like iconoclasm. Like, look at this stuff. You know, this is in maybe this is in Pennsylvania. I can't remember where this is. Ohio? Can't absolutely remember. But you know, this was a statue of George Washington in the United States, and this is what the left does to statues. This is called iconoclasm. I am against this sort of stuff. I think it's a sign of weakness. You know, it's a sign of acknowledging the power of George Washington. Obviously, if he was just an insignificant jackass, you wouldn't do this to his statue. You wouldn't feel so hate-filled and so resentful. You only hate and resent the noteworthy, the significant, the powerful. So these people are acknowledging the power and significance of George Washington by doing this, and they shoot themselves in the foot. This works against them. This works against their message. Of course, they claim white people are fragile, yet they're the ones who see a statue and lose their minds over it. They go absolutely apeshit over just a statue of a person, yet white people are the fragile ones. Whatever you say. So this sort of thing is childish, it's foolish, doing this sort of stuff. You're on native land. Of course, I'm sure that was written by a white-skinned, college-educated liberal who, of course, will never give up their home to a red man. And it's just sad when you see stuff like this. Like, you know, someone worked hard on that statue. Even these, like, I wouldn't say he worked hard on them, but he worked on them. They're his. Like, give them back. Don't destroy them. Like, you know, they're creations, whatever. They exist, and they should be remembered for what they are. And I don't know if Thomas Price is actually a subversive agent, or if he's just a useful idiot being used by the managerial elite. You know, I'd like to think he's just a useful idiot. I don't want to think he's like actually some type of Marxist saboteur who's purposely making this kind of crap just to piss people off or to subvert Western civilization or Western traditions. I don't know. But like these are the territories of Western man that are being essentially conquered by a managerial elite who don't care about us, a cosmopolitan, multicultural, internationalist elite. These elite take their money into other countries, leaving us in poverty because it's easy for them to just move to different countries. They hide their money in offshore accounts. They absolutely defraud us, and then they spit in our faces with stuff like this. And it's psychological warfare is what this stuff is. It's a form of totalitarianism. It's censorship of freedom of speech, because if you were here in this space in Rotterdam and you started talking shit about this statue, half the people in earshot would hate what you're saying and call you a racist bigot, and the other half would be so scared that you're saying it out loud and would encourage you to shut your mouth. So this is just another part of liberal totalitarianism, just making itself known. We're moving away from soft totalitarianism into overt totalitarianism here in the Western world. But to oppose this, we can't engage in crap like this. This is childish nonsense. This is acknowledging the power of these symbols. What we have to do is make these symbols powerless just by, you know, selling them to private collectors or putting them in educational institutions and being like, look at this nonsense that they tried to shove in our faces, and kind of, you know, making them into object lessons. So our statues need to be put back, or we need to make new ones. We need ones with real life and real artistry, real inspirational values. Something like, you could even say, you know, the David has no point. He's just standing there, just like her. She's just standing there. But at least he's like healthy and fit. and he has like the ideal type to work toward. When I see the David, it's like, damn, I need to do some yoga and hit the gym. Look at that guy. He's a healthy dude. Whereas this person just looks bored and blasé about everything. Whereas this guy is like, look at how healthy I am. I could freaking run 10 miles without breaking a sweat. And like this, like, come on. This doesn't make me want to hit the gym or do yoga. This makes me want to find the closest Dunkin' Donuts. Like, this is like a McDonald's advertisement. What the hell is this? This is depressing. This is psychological warfare. This is demoralizing and demotivating. It's very, very strange. So I just wanted to bring this stuff up because, you know, we're in a psychological war, a cultural war, and I'm tired of it. And I wanted, like, don't become blind to these, like the way we're kind of blind to flags. You know, you see the city flag of Venice, and you'll be pretty much blind to it because it's just there. That's what these are meant to be. You're supposed to forget about them and just let them be there, kind of like a flag, a state flag, a city flag, a government flag. I say don't allow these to become backdrop. Don't become blind to these things. Notice them, talk about them, push back against them, talk to your local city councils about removing them in of course a dignified way, a dignified and fair and just way. And get rid of this crap. You know, these are our spaces, our tokens, our political and artistic tokens are more important than these ones. I'm going to just say it. This is our territory. I'm sorry, but it's like, this is not a Venetian woman. You know what I'm saying? And we need to take back our public places, and we need to inspire our people. We need to get rid of this guilt trip that we've been on since the post-World War II era. We need to re-inspire ourselves, re-transcend, expand our minds, expand our consciousness, get back in touch with our cultural heritage, and bring it into a new era, a new stage. And we need new artists with vitality and vigor and enthusiasm and soul and creativity, and start supporting them in our territory. So thank you very much for watching this video. I will see you in the next one.